I'm very conscious that you've been a land rights activist and one of the researchers for a very long time. So you've got the depth of knowledge. And I had to say I felt this feeling of betrayal almost, that the things that we thought would come in terms of this new constitutional order, that we seem to be going backwards. So say how are you feeling about this all?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, you know, as everyone who spoke today was saying, this is a betrayal of what people fought for. And probably the greatest betrayal is that the whole policy agenda is actually being led by people with different financial interests rather than any kind of cohesive government policy. So, you know, I think we saw in '94 that there was a land policy that recognised people's underlying rights, and it introduced a pillar. And then in 1990, a lot of the people who'd been in that first Department of Land Affairs got kicked out, and the focus shifted to a focus on emergent farmers, and all the kind of criteria for prioritising the poor were jettisoned. Admittedly, there had been a lot of problems in those first 6 years. And, you know, I think really, if you look at it historically, you had a pro-poor policy from '94 to 2000, and then you had a kind of commercial farmer policy under Mbeki, and then under Zuma you just had wholesale looting, money being dispersed without any kind of criteria about who it should go to. And so the land reform budget became a budget for looting. And, you know, some of the restitution projects, you know, we see that there are massive kickbacks for government officials like Mala. But even worse than that, the SIU has been doing investigations and has found, you know, a number of land reform farms have gone to officials or politicians, and they've been in this process of recovering those farms. So I think it's a deeply tragic situation in that the land reform budget has been used as a source of enrichment, and at the same time, because of the department's failure to enforce the interim protection of informal land rights or the constitution, the early laws that tried to protect rights, the Labour Tenants Act, ESTA for farm workers, were just simply ignored. The pillar was ignored, and none of this could have happened if the department had upheld laws like the Interim Protection of Informal Land Rights Act.
Now, a sign of hope, I mean, the Constitution, I remember Thuli Madonsela saying something that there was, so far, he said, there was no situation that has emerged in our politics that wasn't in some way anticipated by the Constitution. And let's look at the whole legislative framework. I know that obviously having traditional leadership and customary law systems was a very controversial issue when it was entrenched in the Constitution in Chapter 12, and that's why it's such a short chapter. It's the shortest one, because I don't think the Constitution negotiators could agree on any honest content. So they kicked the can down the road. They hoped that there would be enabling legislation which would then give form and function. And the Zondo Commission made a start, and it seemed to me that this was going to decontaminate the traditional leadership system from its contamination of apartheid and colonialism, and it was on its way to doing that with specialists. But then that seems to me that got captured, and that maybe the whole process of state capture could have seemed to have started with that, in the way in which the Zondo Commission ended up becoming a cure worse than the disease.
All of these laws were developed in concert with one another. So the MPRDA came out, you know, in 2002. The Traditional Leadership and Governance Framework Act came out in 2003. The Communal Land Rights Act in 2004. And I think basically what we had is some very well established senior black politicians being cut in on these mining deals. Particularly Patrice Motsepe, who came from very close links with the Bophuthatswana homeland. And I think that those people, in getting their first cut into mining, often use traditional leadership structures as the mechanism for avoiding having to deal with people's land rights. And Motsepe, since then has been a funder of Controlesa. He spends money, the social and labour plans he spends on building traditional leadership offices. I'm afraid that first generation of black capitalists benefited enormously from this set of laws and were involved in actually conceptualizing it. I think Jeff Khadebe, with his role in the TCB, but he also had a lot of interest in the other laws, and I think Sethan Tai. Sethan Tai was an advocate at the time, negotiating on both sides of those platinum deals. He subsequently got struck off the roll, and now he's back on the roll. So I'm afraid that one of the reasons I think these laws are so intractable is that they actually advance the interests of those first black capitalists who were cut into the mining sector. And Carl van Holt has got a very interesting argument, because he says that, the violence that's gone with them, because you can't deny people's land rights and deny their decision-making authority and expect them to take it lying down. So in every instance there's been violence. And he's saying, is violence not a kind of component of class formation? And if you look back at, England and the Industrial Revolution and the enclosures of the commons, and you look back at, Rome, in every instance, these classes have emerged out of violent subjugation and sort of primitive accumulation of other people's assets. So, that's a pretty bleak picture, but it explains a lot.
So our Constitution, the Bill of Rights is there, Section 25, Section 24 as well. And even though the traditional leaders don't necessarily swear an oath of office to uphold the Constitution, they are constrained by it. And the Queen of Yamampondo, who has since been dethroned, took the Bill of Rights as, in a sense, her manifesto. And that's why she was the Mandela community in some ways was so successful, because they knew that their Queen almost was like a Tuli Madonsela figure who actually saw her role as protecting their interests. And she did it. The Constitution has not been repealed. Surely we can still use legal processes.
Unfortunately, the previous Minister of Rural Development, Gugile Nkwinti, said to my colleague Ben Cousins at PLAS, he said to him, "You'll win in the courts, but we're winning on the ground." And they are, because they actually are, all of these mining deals are extra legal, and yet they've gone ahead with them. They're putting police into all the royal households in the Eastern Cape. They've got a pilot project, including that in Ndamase who signed that deal. The kinds of abuses we're seeing by traditional leaders now are much more serious than those that we were seeing in '94. Because with the transition in '94, traditional leaders kind of, had been exposed in the anti-Bantustan rebellions. They drew back. They were sort of anxious about being seen as complete dictators. And now they have been incredibly empowered. And of course there are good traditional leaders. I mean, if you think of how resistance is mounted in many areas, it's mounted through traditional structures and consultative processes, but often at village level, like the Ibandla at Xolobeni, and with Mavusa's case in Nelmouth, where the headmen, absolutely stand up to this abuse of power. And again, you've had some senior traditional leaders who've stood up to this abuse of power. Many, in fact. But once law gives you the opportunity to get away with the kind of lease agreement that we both saw at Port St. John's, you have to be a very principled person to...
But maybe if I turn the question around, what do we need to do to make sure we don't only win in courts? So what else do you think we can do to encourage the next generation?
I think we've got to get this going on vernacular radio. I really feel that the debate in the Daily Maverick or the Mail and Guardian is not where we're going to harness the voices that will make the ANC sit up and listen. Because however brave people are, and a lot of people aren't as brave as Xolobeni, they get divided. They get bought off. So I mean, I really think that because this issue is so resonant for people, and because so many people fought against this and believed they'd defeated it, these stories evoke responses, and I think if we could just get some kind of real conversations taking place on vernacular radio. And so my dream has been that we get some sort of reporter, a roving African language speaking reporter who goes to different places, gets different clips, and then puts those together on talk shows. Because, you know, marches, we've had marches, you know, nobody pays any attention.
And also the violence. I mean, for me, I can't really do my job as a social worker without knowing that others are doing their professional jobs, the police and the prosecuting authorities. I mean, it's been 3.5 years and the killers are still not being, you know, charged or arrested. 4 people still awaiting trial who were charged for violence that preceded Buzuka's thing. And that court case keeps getting postponed. We believe it's because we know that the accused will, once they're in the dock, they will be telling us information that the government does not want to know. Now that's about the rule of law. Okay, that then brings me to the Zondo Commission. Is there not the place for us to actually elucidate the whole narrative of state capture by saying, well, where did it actually start? What do you think of the idea of us maybe making a submission to the Zondo Commission saying, how do we fireproof our state from being captured again or by other interests? Do you think that's got legs?
I think it has got legs, and I think, you know, maybe one's got to do what you're suggesting and focus it on individual people. I mean, there's Nyalada Pilani, who's the deputy president of Contralesa. He's the one where the 25 billion has disappeared under his watch. And he's very close to Baloy, the former deputy minister. So yes, I think it has got legs. They seem to be quite interested in the Zondo Commission. So then what would you would focus in on the DMR and how it was captured?
Well, yes, and I think
there's a lot of evidence on that.
There is. I mean, the first point is that from 2010 we had the one environmental system, which then basically put the DMR in, as a fox in charge of the hen house, and reduced the authority of the environmental authorities, who had done a good job up until 2008 in showing that first mining rights could never, we didn't even have to go to court. Under ministerial review, it was those mining rights were revoked. You know, and then of course the law changed. So when you put that all down, I would have thought that historical perspective would really give the Zondo Commission and policymakers and everybody some sense of, well, how did this happen, you know, and how do we avoid it happening in the future?
Well, I mean, I think it would also open up a can of worms because, you know, one of the reasons that the mining companies have gone along with Montash is because he can close them down. And, you know, when the high-level panel, the Motlanthe one, interviewed them and said, why are you doing this when there's no lawful basis? They said, oh, because the DMR advises us to do this. And they were sort of saying, and if we go against the DMR, we suffer very bad consequences. So, you know, another possibility would be that it opens up more evidence of how these BE licenses were awarded. I mean, that reporter Tim Cohen did quite a lot of stuff about how the DMR told companies who should be their BE parts. It's not just a matter of a narrative. It might create an opportunity to get different voices to actually elaborate the fuller story.
Yes. Well, of course, the fact that there's also now there's 6 of us facing slap suits for talking out. I mean, I've said to Gwena Bantashi on occasion, I said, you know, Minister, you know, you made an oath of office uphold the Constitution. All I've done is my job as a social worker. Surely, the very least you can do is tell Mark Caruso and these guys that they are basically out of order.
No, I mean, I don't think these things are to do with morality or the Constitution. I think they're to do with deep vested interests. And I think, you know, if you look at how dependent Ramaphosa is currently on Montashe.
Any last thoughts that you would like to share in terms of how you see this program, this campaign unfolding? Are we going to succeed? I mean, we will succeed in court, won't we? I mean, it seems pretty cut and dried. I mean, is there any doubt about that?
Yeah, but I mean, Xolobeni is exceptional because the people have been so strong. So many other areas, you know, they find people to buy off, and even if they found some to buy off in Xolobeni, you've still got extraordinarily outspoken people. Look, I look back on the days when we fought forced removals and it seemed impossible that we would win, and then we won. And what was impossible previously was completely reasonable. So that keeps me going.